How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Monday, September 16th, live here after most of the games yesterday in the NFL. We got a bunch of good ones to go over on today's show. I picked about 4 of the best games that I thought from yesterday, and we're just going to go over them, over some of the major talking points, and just give our thoughts on them. But not without starting with the first segment on Monday Night Football, previewing tonight's game between the Falcons and the Eagles. Then, in the following segment, we're going to get into one of those games, the Bengals and the Chiefs game, arguably one of the best or the best of the entire weekend. So there's a lot to talk about there that we will get into. Not before, though, like I always like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments or any opinions you'd like to share on a lot of the games that happen or will be happening as the season go on, please let us know. Don't hesitate to drop anything you'd like to say in the chat. Now, if your input and your insight is a big part of what makes this show great, and we always thrive on your energy and your insights on whatever you guys have to say. And now, to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the air, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the super chat feature available to you guys now. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But if you do prefer, we still have the alternate method, the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, where you could still tip, donate, and leave a question or comment there if you prefer. We couldn't do this without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community, always staying involved in all of our live shows here at the network. But with that being said, now we can jump into our first segment, not talking about this past weekend just yet, but what we have in store for us tonight, the Monday Night Football game between the Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons, the last game of Week 2 tonight. The Falcons traveling to Philadelphia. Kickoff is at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Falcons coming in 0-1, and the Eagles coming into this matchup on the other side of that 1-0. Starting off with the Eagles and just a bit of an overview, some pretty big injury news, and we're going to start with that. A.J. Brown was listed as questionable heading into this game off of the back of last week, Friday into Saturday. But then it all developed quickly, and A.J. Brown was and is ruled out for tonight's game. So that's huge, big news for the Eagles and how potent their offense is. It's going to lose a bit of their punch with A.J. Brown now being sidelined. But regardless of that, going over some of the talking points about the Eagles, they're coming off of that big 34-29 win in Brazil over the Green Bay Packers. Dominant performance from Saquon Barkley, obviously, with 3 total touchdowns, 109 rushing yards, and really just asserting his dominance in that game. And what a better way to kind of show what kind of player the Eagles are obviously getting in Saquon Barkley, right? But overall, with that being the case and with them ultimately winning, it's all great, it seems, but it wasn't all perfect or all as ideal as you would have liked, because Jalen Hurts struggled a bit in this game. You know, he wasn't the reason why they won, but he also wasn't the reason why they lost. But regardless of that, you know, he played and he recorded 2 interceptions in this game, had a couple of questionable decisions and a couple of questionable throws that luckily didn't really affect the Eagles too much apart from those 2 interceptions. So I don't want to say they were lucky to be 1-0 at this point, but it certainly could have gone the other way if not for their defense. I'll be interested to see how well they play now into this game, if they're able to keep that same mentality. And also, sticking with that defense, Vic Fangio, I thought he played very well in his debut as the new defensive coordinator for the Eagles. On the other side of the ball, Kellen Moore as well, I thought had a great debut, great starting game for the Eagles as well as the offensive coordinator now. And I thought specifically with Kellen Moore, with how much talent this team has, they had to find something else that kind of made them stand out, right? Had to find something that they could go to when talent isn't good enough, right? Because talent, not only everybody says it, that everybody in the NFL is talented. And while that might be the case, this Eagles team has been talented for some time now, right? They've had Jalen for a while. They might not have had Saquon, but the running game was still very dominant with that dynamic of the option, the RPOs, and everything like that. AJ, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, that offensive line, probably the biggest reason why they've been so dominant. And they've been talented already for so many years, back to their Super Bowl run, continuing that on with the same group of guys for the most part up until now. And still now, they're almost there, coming off of the back of last season where they just crashed out of the playoffs. They needed to find something else that distinguished them from the rest of the NFC, because the NFC is very, very just like all over the place right now. You have the Cardinals blowing out the Rams. In another sense, the Bucs are now 2-0 going into Detroit and beating them. The Packers get a win without their starting quarterback. The Bears, who I think everybody had a lot of expectations for, are also 0-2, and the Vikings with Sam Darnold are 2-0. So the NFC is very much all over the place, and the Eagles, I thought, needed to find something that distinguished them, and I think Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio as well with that can be a huge piece to that. And with Kellen Moore especially, a lot of the pre-snap motions, the actions to kind of get Jalen Hurts in a better position to diagnose what is in front of him, right? With the motions, with the different formations, the moving pockets and whatnot. All of that kind of helps Jalen decipher what's in front of him. Motions, kind of give away whether it's man or zone coverage, depending on how well the opposing defense schemes it up and whatnot. But overall, I think that could help Jalen Hurts a lot. And we saw a lot of that we didn't see last year with this offense. So very happy to see that. I like the Eagles offense, but heading into this game without A.J. Brown could be something that, throws everything off potentially. Then on the other side of the ball, the Atlanta Falcons coming in, no real injuries to worry about. They're all pretty much healthy, coming off of that 18-10 loss at home to the Pittsburgh Steelers, where their defense played as well as you would have liked. They didn't give up a touchdown, but they ended up losing the game. More so just on the offense, right? Only putting up 10 points and getting shut out in the second half. Not a good look to where this offense, I and a lot of people spoke about it all season, should have been the strong point, whereas the defense probably was a little bit 50-50, but already in one game, we've seen how the defense has stood up, albeit against the Steelers offense. Steelers offense, Eagles offense, very different, obviously, in their approaches and talent on that side of the ball, quite frankly. So we'll see how they hold up right now in this game, just hours away from kicking off. But sticking to that defense, I really liked the dynamic of Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates. Very good in that Steelers game. They were all over the place. Arthur Smith, the Steelers offensive coordinator, even said that they didn't want to throw it into the middle of the field to try and avoid them as much as possible, and it worked out for them. They got out with the win, and the defense overall just playing very well. Matthew Judon got a sack as well, contributing to that new group of guys. And now going into it a little bit more on offense, they disappointed, obviously only putting up 10 points. Ray McCloud, I'm sure nobody expected to be the leading receiver for the Atlanta Falcons in week 1 because Drake London blanketed all game by Joey Porter Jr., had 2 receptions for 15 yards. Kyle Pitts, he scored a touchdown, but he only had 3 receptions for 26 yards. And Bijan Robinson did his thing, but not getting into the end zone, it's hard for people to pick out that performance just because you were on the losing end of it. And one reason potentially why this offense was a little bit anemic was because Kirk might not be 100%. That was the thought going into this game now, because the just vanilla sort of offense, for a lack of a better terms, with this team, a lot of shotgun, a lot of pistol formations where it became very easy for the Steelers to just sort of pin their ears back and try to attack a very limited mobility-wise Kirk Cousins, who just stood back there, made a lot of good throws. Credit to him for sticking in there and staying in the pocket, but it's not a winning recipe at this day and age in the NFL. So that's one thing. But Raheem Morris and Kirk Cousins himself said that Kirk was 100%, that he was healthy. So if that's the case, I hope tonight we see a bit more of what what made Kirk successful in Minnesota, which was the play action, which they could do very well at with Bijan Robinson, obviously, and Tyler Algier. Their offensive line is better at run blocking than pass protection. So I'm trying to see more of that. I'm trying to see Kirk under center, running some rollouts, some play action, some bootlegs, some motions. I want to see the whole thing tonight, not just Kirk sitting back there, hiking the ball and having Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Sweat come after him, because he's just going to be sitting there, and we're going to see more of the same from last week. And off of that point, just to go over all of this news, and something else that was actually kind of interesting that I wanted to make sure I got in here in this segment. Last year, Kirk Cousins with the Minnesota Vikings played Philadelphia in week 2 as well last year in 2023 in week 2, and he had a very good game. He had a great game, actually. 364 yards, 4 touchdowns in a 34-28 loss. And I think that just had to do more so with the turnovers that he had outside of him. So this offense for the Falcons should be better in this game, and just from an overall group standpoint, not just from, Justin Jefferson obviously is one of the best players in the league. So the Falcons might not have a guy like that, but as a group, you take the totality of it, this Falcons team offense should be better than what we saw last week, but it doesn't mean I'm going to pick them. I feel like the Eagles have a better recipe against this Falcons team, where last week we saw TJ Watt dominating. I fear that it could be the same for Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis from the inside rather than the outside. And also, I like the way that the Eagles defense, off of that point, was willing to give up a bunch of yards. You might get to the red zone like the Packers did in their offense, but they just bended a little bit, but they didn't break at the end of the day. They only gave up field goals, even through turnovers from Jalen Hurts. They only gave up field goals in the end. They really bunkered down in the red zone, and I think that's going to make a big difference. I'm going to go with the Eagles tonight. I think they have enough to get over this challenge that the Atlanta Falcons pose, sending them to 2-0, and unfortunately for the Falcons and how that division is going, I feel like they're going to go to 0-2 tonight and try to get a win the following week against the Kansas City Chiefs at home. Those are my predictions. Let me know what you guys think of them, and also make sure to drop your predictions leading up into the game tonight. But now that we have gotten that out of the way, we're going to recap all of the games, most of the games from yesterday. A lot of good ones, starting with the Bengals and the Kansas City Chiefs in the next segment. A 26-25 win for the Chiefs on a last-second field goal for Harrison Butker. We're going to go into how that all happened and whether or not the Bengals gave this game away or the Chiefs won this game and stole it from the Cincinnati Bengals. So that is coming up right after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, I'll diss my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here now on the show to recap one of the games, starting off with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Kansas City Chiefs. Just off of yesterday, a great game, arguably the best game of the entire slate from yesterday, and it was a good one based on the opponents, the history, the rivalry. what was said leading up into this game were all talking points on what we brought up here on the show. And, it didn't disappoint. An awesome game between the Bengals and the Chiefs. The Chiefs end up winning this game at the buzzer after a Harrison Butker field goal to win it there in the last seconds with a final score of 26-25 in favor of the Chiefs. But breaking down what this game ultimately was from the start to the finish, you look at the first half, Cincinnati came out better than the Chiefs did, winning that first half 16-10, but looked even better from the standpoint that their offense, their look, and their appeal, I think, looked better, right? Meaning that against the New England Patriots, it was all just very predictable. It was all boring, quite honestly, and there was no creativity in it. And now this time, they lined up in a lot of different sets, a lot of different personnel groups. They moved the pocket for Joe Burrow. I think we saw him be a bit more mobile than we did against the Patriots. And it just wasn't so stagnant anymore. It wasn't so just hike the ball, stand in the pocket, throw it, then run it back like 10 different times in the span of 3 drives or something like that. This time, it was a lot harder to game plan against, which you need going up against a Steve Spagnuolo defense. So I thought they did better, and they started off the game better, quite frankly, winning that first half, limiting the Chiefs to only 10 points. And from that point on, you look at that being the starting point of this, with that being the starting point of all of this, like I said, it was all really without Ja'Marr Chase, right? He wasn't a prominent figure in the game until later on, but he finished the game with 4 receptions for 35 yards, and not only was that, maybe not ideal, but you did get some more contributions out of other guys. Iosivas had 2 touchdowns. Mike Gesicki had 7 receptions for like 91 yards or something like that. It was good to see those other guys stepping up. Now you also have T. Higgins coming back eventually. That is a good sign, but what wasn't a good sign from this Bengals team, although they were leading, was the fact that in 2 weeks now we are yet to really see this running game being a factor or a contributor at all to their game plan or affecting the game at all, because Zach Moss was their leading rusher with only 12 carries for 34 yards, and it's not like they needed him, it looks like, evidently, because they were in this game the entire time, but I feel like it would have definitely helped a bit more with the game plan and the planning around it and just managing this game better. I would have felt just seeing their running game get a little bit going in this second week after, falling flat the first week. So that was a bit of a disappointing, but regardless of that, they had the lead going into the first half. And then after that, most of the action came in the fourth quarter. There wasn't much other than a few plays, and I don't even think they might have scored that many points in the third quarter. Most of this game really fell into the fourth quarter. It felt a lot like a playoff game, honestly, because of the atmosphere, like, again, the rivalry and the big moments where I feel this game really took a major swing, and you wouldn't be surprised that the Chiefs came out on the winning end of all those game-changing plays at the end of the day and ended up winning this game, even though they were exceeded by the Bengals in this game, I think it's fair to say. But those 3 moments that really stood out to me in the fourth quarter were, the first one was the fumble by Joe Burrow in that game, in that fourth quarter, caused by the Chiefs and their pass rush. He was going down. I didn't really see the ball come out until they showed you another camera angle, and you could see the ball starting to come loose. Big play. The Chiefs scoop it up. They score on it. Nobody really made a big deal out of it just because it looked pretty clear from on the field. So that was a bit surprising, and that almost turned the tide and gave the Chiefs a big, sigh of relief from the defensive side of the ball to give them the lead at 23-22 to start the fourth quarter. A very good, timely, momentum-switching sort of play for the Chiefs. And then the second moment right after that, the drive right after, where Cincinnati is still trying to regain some of that momentum they ultimately lost on that fumble. They had some momentum going. They were, I think, over midfield by this time, and that's when you got, I think, what a lot of people will be talking about in regards to Ja'Marr Chase in this game. Like I mentioned, not a prominent figure on the field, necessarily to the Bengals and trying to win, but he did affect this game because of that unsportsmanlike conduct flag that was on him because of the way that he spoke to the referee. I think his name was Alex Kemp or something like that. I'm not too sure, but the official, I think, let him go for a little bit. Just sticking to this play for a moment, I feel like Ja'Marr Chase at the moment, once he got up and was very animated, like you see there on your screen. This was after the fact they threw the flag, but he got up very animated, started jawing at the ref a little bit. I thought Alex Kemp did a good job of kind of letting him go a little bit, not getting overly emotional with whatever Ja'Marr Chase had to say. But then, he kept going a bit more, and it looked like the official was kind of getting to a point where, enough was enough. But, Ja'Marr Chase kept going. He was very adamant that later on it came out, and he claimed that he felt that was a hip drop tackle by Trent McDuffie, which if you guys see the video anywhere or were watching the game, and you saw the replay, I don't think it was much of a hip drop tackle, but Ja'Marr obviously thought it was. He got very upset about it, plus the just frustration that I'm sure he was feeling throughout the entire game, not really being involved. It all kind of boiled over at that point, and yeah, I like the emotions. I like the fact that he really wants to win. It was all in the best interest for the Cincinnati Bengals, but at that moment, at critical moments in the fourth quarter where you're driving, where you just gave up a fumble return for a touchdown, you can't have something like that happen. It's very rare that you see something like that happen in football. I feel like because the NFL has really tried to cut down on those moments. I can't remember the last time something like that happened. So for it to happen now in this sort of game where the Bengals really wanted to win, really wanted to make a statement and show everyone that last week was such a fluke, that they just come out and beat the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl winning team at home on the road, I guess you could say, for the Bengals, I think would have made a huge statement. But this moment, I think, really played a part in doing so. And, it took the Bengals out of field goal range, and they ultimately didn't really get anything out of it. In the end of that, they only ended up kicking a field goal, actually. They were knocked out of potentially, driving or creating a drive to score a touchdown. So they settled for a field goal off of that. And, the final moment was that 2-minute drive by Patrick Mahomes at the end. Fourth down, it needed to be completed, obviously, for the Chiefs. They needed to have it, but it was a pass intended for Rashee Rice down the field. I forget how many seconds were left, but it was a fourth down, and if they got it, the time would have kept running, or if they didn't get it, obviously the game was over. So this was a very critical play. Patrick Mahomes rolls left a little bit, just throws it up to Rashee Rice, trying to get a completion, and I forget the Bengals player's name, the secondary player, but he gets there just a fraction of a second too early. He knocks into Rashee Rice from the back, and, the ball goes flying over their heads, and the officials call a pass interference, which is just a dream for this Chiefs team because, right, a fourth down to get just bailed out completely like that by the officials and just be on the other side of the field where Harrison Butker is as automatic as it gets. It's just a killer, heart-sinking moment for all Bengals fans. And on that play, or that pass interference call, I felt like it was a good call. I thought it was the accurate call to make. You don't want something like that to happen, obviously, but if we're going to call a game as it is, I don't like the argument of, calling the game like how the officials have been calling it all game, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times when you hear teams say, oh, the officials are letting the guys play today, or they're getting extra physical today, the refs are really letting them, go at it, that's all fine for a moment, but I don't think that should dictate how they call the entire game. If a call is a pass interference or a holding or, hands to the face or something like that, roughing the passer, make the call because that is the call to make. I don't think the moment or anything else should really dictate how the officials officiate the game. If it is the call there and it is the right call to make, just make it regardless of the implications. And I felt the officials really did that with this call. A lot of people aren't going to like it, just because I think it is the Chiefs and, there is something there of, the officials. It always feels like they're helping them regardless of what people think. I thought the call was right. So it was a crusher for the Bengals, obviously. They go on to lose the game because of that field goal. But the Chiefs didn't play great in this game. It's weird because the Chiefs Patrick Mahomes had 151 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And outside of Rashee Rice, no other wide receiver had more than 2 receptions the entire game. Travis Kelce has not really been a factor. They struggled more than they did last week, obviously. Now they lose Isaiah Pacheco after this game with a fractured fibula. And it's weird because the Chiefs won the game, but you could say that you feel a little bit weird about it, uneasy because you didn't play well. Whereas the Bengals go to 0-2, but after this game, you kind of feel like they should be feeling better. And it's weird because obviously you just lost, but they looked a lot more innovative on offense, getting everybody involved. Even though Jamar Chase was neutralized for most of the game, you got other guys involved, and you looked a lot more like the Bengals later on in the year, right? Rather than the Bengals in September, where now they're like 1-9 or something like that. So, in this game, I felt that because of those big moments, because of how much these playoff scenario-like games kind of weigh on those moments where two teams are so equally matched that it's really just a matter of inches, a play or two here or there where you end up losing the game. I feel like Cincinnati gave it away because of that fumble. Of course, you don't mean to fumble, but it's a cruel game, and sometimes where you just accidentally don't hold the ball for that long or don't hold it so securely, it might squeak out, you give up a touchdown. And the same thing for Jamar Chase, right? You want to win this game so bad, you let the emotions get the best of you, and you cause your team 15 yards back. And from that point on, the pass interference is another thing. That's not something you can control too much, but it is what it is at that point. I felt like the Chiefs were kind of giving it away rather than the Bengals were giving it away rather than the Chiefs taking it. And shots below the belt, they're missing Joe Mixon. I don't understand why they let him go. That's also another thing, right? I touched on the running game, the fact that who is it? Zach Moss only gets 34 yards. You could look at this game and think that they could have won regardless of the running game, but Joe Mixon, I think, would have made this game probably even more in the favor of the Bengals, and it probably wouldn't have gotten to a point where it is a one-score game, right? If Joe Mixon's playing in this game and they're running it very well, the Bengals could win this game probably by a touchdown or something like that. But, they obviously let him go. I don't understand it as well. He's going to be a huge loss for them. You already see how much he means to the Houston Texans after the first 2 weeks. So they're going to have to try and overcome that. They looked better, but, I'm not too sure if that's just a Chiefs-Bengals thing or something like that, kind of like the Bills and the Dolphins. So I like it. There are better signs there. Joe Burrow looked a little bit more like Joe Burrow, but I want to see him now next week and the weeks following, right after that, where T. Higgins comes back. They will play the Washington Commanders next. Then after that, they go to Carolina and then host the Baltimore Ravens. So they have 2 games here where they should be favored, and I think they will win ultimately before they have some AFC North action in a couple of weeks. But a great game, regardless of the fact of whether you agree with the calls or some of these non-calls as well. It was an awesome game to watch. Definitely my favorite of the entire week, but we have a lot more to catch up on some more games that we had. Next up on our schedule is going over the Saints and Cowboys game. 44-19, the Saints march into Dallas and take the pride, take everything from the Dallas Cowboys, honestly, in this game. We're going to go into it, more of what happened, why it happened, and my thoughts on it right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss another one of the entertaining games. Not one of the better games, I will say, just an entertaining game just for the simple fact that it was so surprising. The Saints go to 2-0 after a 44-19 win over the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. I'm now looking at the next games I want to talk about. This game, the Baltimore game coming up, and the Tampa Bay game coming up. My picks for all these games were wrong, and not that I'm too upset. I'm a little bit upset by it because I picked them all of them wrong, but I'm not too hurt by it just because they were surprising. Some of them were very good games. This one, not so much, because I thought Dallas, coming off of last week in a visit to Cleveland, how they looked, dominating the Cleveland Browns, dominating Deshaun Watson, not letting them do, quite frankly, anything in that game. Now, to come into this game, I will admit, I guess a prisoner of the moment because I was riding high with the Cowboys. Dak just got his new deal. They were able to keep CD after the entire offseason where I've been critiquing them. I was feeling good about the Cowboys, thinking that, wow, a win at Cleveland, it's very impressive. So now you go back home. I wasn't too high on the Saints, honestly, just because they beat the Panthers, and a lot of teams are going to beat the Panthers, so I wasn't too sure about them. But, this home opener for Dallas, it looked like a lot like their last home game of 2023 where they lost similarly to the Green Bay Packers 48-32 back in January. Now they have their next home game right after that, and they again give up 40 plus points this time to the New Orleans Saints, and they score even less points now. They score 13 points less than they did against the Green Bay Packers, and the Saints win it, behind a huge game from Alvin Kamara, and I actually have that information up here for you guys. In case you didn't watch the game or you stopped watching the game, this is what Alvin Kamara's day sort of looked like, right? 20 carries, 115 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 receptions for 65 yards, and another receiving touchdown on top of that. Just complete domination. And again, going back to the Packers game in the playoffs, Aaron Jones not having a game up to this level, because I think this is crazy, like 4 touchdowns, almost 200 total yards on the day for Alvin Kamara. You go back to January with Aaron Jones, and he similarly had a multi-touchdown game, a bunch of rushing yards, and the Cowboys were just out of it by the first half in both games. In this game, they allowed 35 points in just the first half, and I think I heard something on ESPN or something like that the Saints scored on their first 5 to 6 drives, and they were all touchdowns, which is crazy because this Cowboys defense should be better than that. But also, like I said before, I wasn't too taken aback by the fact that the Saints put up almost 50 points on the Panthers, just because the Panthers, I would say, are that bad rather than the Saints are that good. But I guess I was completely wrong, because in back-to-back weeks, they're putting up they've almost scored nearly 100 points in 2 games, which is nuts. And I also saw that they've scored on their first 15 offensive drives, all touchdowns as well. So, credit to the Saints. I'll openly say that I was wrong about them through 2 weeks of the NFL, but it's more to say about Dallas, I think, obviously, in this sense, than it is about the Saints. Right from the start, the Saints jumped all over the Cowboys, like I said. They never trailed in this game, scoring touchdowns on their first 5 to 6 drives. 35 points in the first half as well. And from that point on, it completely nullified everything that the Cowboys were about, and everything good that they showed you against the Cleveland Browns was all up in dust. It was just non-effective in this game, because when we were talking about that Cleveland Browns game, I was talking earlier before, and in that sense, with the Cowboys, an impressive win to go on the road, like I started off this segment by saying, but ultimately, I felt like I was more disappointed by the Browns than I was impressed by the Dallas Cowboys. And I think now it kind of shows why, right? Because I think in that first game, I think Deshaun just played pretty bad. Their offense was really not there to compete with the Dallas Cowboys offense. And now, in this game, we have almost more of the same. I don't think the Cowboys played that much better or that much worse on offense, but their defense, and this time around, they didn't have those mistakes by Deshaun Watson, right? It didn't look so poor from an execution standpoint from Deshaun Watson. This time around, the Saints come out and just jump on them, run it right at them, punch them right in their face, right at home, and it really showed up on the scoreboard. And another comment here from Shots Below the Belt: are the Saints for real? The unwritten rule in the NFL is teams don't know they're bad until after week 3. Beat up on bad Panthers team and took advantage of an overrated Cowboys pass rush. Are the Saints for real? Am I ready to say the Saints are for real? I will check who they play next week. That is a good rule. I've never heard that rule, but I think that is a good, benchmark to see where a team is and how good a team is. The Saints, very impressive. I didn't think they were going to look like this at all this year. I definitely didn't think they were going to be 2-0. They play the Eagles next week, so that'll be a good measuring test because I think the Eagles, like I mentioned before, are going to win tonight. So both of them should head into that game at 3-0. That would be a good test to see where they're at. But I think if I had to pick which one they're closer to, I would say they are closer to being for real than they are not being, just being pretenders or something like that. I feel like any team that puts up almost 100 points, and the way that they did it too, running the ball and having everything, kind of sync up to each other, kind of build up to the next play, that's something that I really liked about it. And it goes back to that point, like you said, about the Cowboys pass rush, because back to that first game, they were able to pin their ears back, and Micah, DeMarcus Lawrence, Eric Kendricks, all these guys were stars in the first week, right? But now, when you have a team try to assert their dominance on them, run the ball very efficiently, and just kind of move them back, quite literally, just move their offensive line, move their defense back, just manhandling them from the start. And from that point on, you're playing catch-up, right? You're trying to catch up to the fact that the Saints are 4 touchdowns up in the first half. You're not very so successful. You're not benefiting off of your pass rush because they're still running the ball, and Micah, DeMarcus Lawrence don't really have a chance to affect the game from that point on. And that also just signals to me that this Dallas team isn't built to play with any sort of, deficit at any point in this game. From the 2 weeks that we saw, their offense was all right to deal with a very bad Cleveland offense, but a team like this, everybody's talking about the West Coast offense and how efficient it is against the Cowboys defense with Matt LaFleur running it with Green Bay, the 49ers, the Lions, and all these teams. That is accurate, I will say, just from that breakdown, talking about that offense and how the Cowboys really struggle with it. And it just comes down to the fact to me that I feel like when you have a defense like this, and I think Dak kind of mentioned it a little bit afterwards in his post-game press conference, that the offense, kind of struggles when your defense is struggling to stop the opposing offense from scoring so many points. From that point on, if this defense isn't getting those splash plays, those momentum-building plays, like a lot of defenses, but I think more so with this defense, if they don't have a moment where they kind of sense that they could take over this game, or where they get sort of, punched in the mouth, like I said before, then they're kind of shell-shocked. They kind of don't know what to do. And then from that point on, their confidence is a little bit rattled, I would say, at some point in time. And then from that point on, you have these big plays, Kamara trying to get loose or just loose the entire game. And then from that point on, this Cowboys team becomes very enamored with trying to stop the run, and then you get plays to Rashid Shaheed down the field on that long touchdown, another big play to Chris Olave down the field, and then if you're the Cowboys, you don't know where to look or where to stop the bleeding, right? Because you think it's a run, you want to stop Kamara from having a big day, then it's a play action, and now you're too far in front of yourself, and someone's running, 10 yards behind you. It was a great game plan by the Saints overall, to give them their credit. Like I said, I didn't think they would be here at 2-0, but I think it says more about the Cowboys that the biggest thing to me is that they haven't improved from what burned them last year in last year's playoffs, right? This is almost a carbon copy of what we saw in that playoff game against the Packers, right? right from the start, Jordan Love doesn't get touched, doesn't feel any sort of pressure, and they beat him with the pass. Then Aaron Jones gets going, and then this Cowboys defense doesn't know what to do. There's more pressure on the offense, and now more so than last year, this offense doesn't have the playmakers that it should have to kind of compete with a Saints offense now, evidently a 49ers offense, Lions offense, Packers offense. Outside of CeeDee Lamb, nobody on this team really scares me. Brandon Cooks is all right. Jalen Tolbert had an all right game, but again, they need somebody else outside of CeeDee Lamb, and when their defense is sort of rattled, they can't rush the passer and make plays. They're taken out of the game. Now the running game is taken out of the game. This team becomes very one-dimensional, and I don't think you can rely on Jalen Tolbert, Brandon Cooks to win you games or win you shootouts against the Saints and or any of these other NFC teams. So that's the problem that I see with the Cowboys. The biggest issue is that they haven't improved, and now we've said it all offseason that it's a case where it's great that they were able to keep their playmakers, but because they stayed the same, I don't know how you could expect different results from this team. If anything, they got worse because they lost a lot of pieces this offseason as well. So right now they're sitting at about an average team, a very okay performance and now followed up by a very poor performance at home. It says a lot about, where they stand right now in the inconsistency and shots below the belt that the Cowboys defense spent too much on the field to be winded. What's their game plan for Baltimore? That's where I was getting at. Next week is going to be a very interesting game. They definitely got winded for sure. They spent a lot of time on the field, and it goes back into what I was saying with you're not able to rush the passer at that point in time because first you got to stop the run. If you stop the run, then you can start thinking about pass rushing. But if you're on the field for too long, you can't stop the run, then Mike is going to have to take a seat, kind of catch his breath, and then you kind of lose that element of pass rush, any sort of pressure. So that's one thing. And then for their game plan against Baltimore's kind of struggled a little bit, trying to get Derrick Henry going. So if the Cowboys somehow manage to get in front of them, I think it'll help them out a little bit more. Both of these teams, I think, are still struggling to find what they do very well. The Ravens trying to figure out when and how to use Derrick Henry. People are screaming for them to use him a lot more, obviously, but I will get into more of that in the next segment, but it'll be an interesting game plan. I think for them, they have to try to establish some sort of running game because they are so limited from the pass aspect of this offense. You need to get like 50, 60 yards from Zeke or Dowd or something like that. Are they capable of doing it? I don't know. I have my doubts, but ideally that's what you would like for this offense to be a bit more of a threat. But it wasn't a threat in this game. The Saints comfortably take this game and now sit comfortably at the top of the NFC at 2-0. Big surprise, but arguably also not as big of a surprise as the next game we're going to talk about. The Ravens dropping to 0-2 after losing at home to the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to break down that game, what we saw, what we liked, what we didn't like, and is there a reason to panic over the Baltimore Ravens going forward now? We'll answer all of that once we return after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the action now on the show. Going back to last segment, we briefly talked about the Baltimore Ravens, and now we can fully get into that game. After yesterday, the Ravens shockingly fall to 0-2, the Raiders getting up to 1-1, and after another home opener loss in week 2 with this one, even more than the Cowboys, I don't think I was as high on the Cowboys as I am on the Ravens at this point, but still another home opening loss in week 2. Very, very off-putting because Minshew and the Raiders steal a win in this one 26-23 over the Ravens. The Ravens fall to 0-2, like I said before, the first time they've started a season 0-2 since 2015. And last time they did start 0-2, they actually started 0-3 in that season, and they finished it 5-11. Obviously, I don't think that's almost impossible to happen with this team, but that's the last time they started this bad. But only 2 weeks in. I'm not jumping off of the ship yet. It kind of hints at my answer to, is there a reason to fully panic yet? But talking more in depth about this game was closer than I thought originally at the start. I thought the Ravens, like I'm sure I said on Friday, I'm sure I said that the Ravens were going to handle this quite comfortably, winning by at least a touchdown or two, and that couldn't have been farther from the truth in this one because Baltimore did lead 9-6 at half, both teams scoring a touchdown in the third quarter as well after that. So it was 9-13 heading into the fourth quarter, and much like the Chiefs game, these close games where you kind of let a team hang around, where the Bengals were the better team in that game against the Chiefs, but they let them hang around too much and they lost the critical moments. Almost the same thing here with the Baltimore Ravens, because to start the fourth quarter, it was a Derrick Henry, touchdown, capping it off with a drive, with a touchdown to end that drive, Derrick Henry getting into the end zone with 12 minutes left in the quarter, or in the game pretty much, with a 23-13 lead, 10-point lead with about 11 minutes to go. You're kind of thinking a little bit here that the Ravens are going to continue to use Derrick Henry, kind of chew the clock out once they get the ball back, maybe score another touchdown if they're fortunate enough to do that. And this game could be over, right? 10-point lead in the fourth. Really great teams don't give those type of leads up. So that's what I was kind of leaning towards. But then the next few minutes, very confusing and very surprising from both teams, right? Because after that, the Raiders answer with only a field goal. So you're up about a touchdown right now, and you have Derrick Henry, coming off of the momentum of the last drive. You feel like the Raiders gave the game up right now, or at least I did, right? Only answering with a field goal. I'm thinking, the Ravens are just about to score right now, and this game is really going to be over. But the Raiders got an interception on the drive right after that, and then what followed after that interception and the rest of the game was this. Derrick Henry only got one carry in the final 10 minutes of this game. Going back to the Chiefs game, he only had 2 carries in the final 10 minutes of that game. So through 2 weeks, in the final 10 minutes of both of these games, close games for the Ravens, Derrick Henry, their big offseason acquisition, has only had 3 carries through the last 10 minutes in each of these games. Let it sink in a little bit, right? Because the problem with this Ravens team last year, and why I'm sort of emphasizing this point, is because last year, you guys see the memes. If you guys are at all on social media, you see the memes of the Ravens and the leads that they have in the fourth quarter, and the caption says the Ravens have lost all of these games, right? You just add this one on to the collection that there is already. It's obviously a big problem, right? It's obviously something you wanted to work on, even though they had a great record last year. They were the number 1 seed last year. It is a glaring problem that you have to address. They were fortunate to have, I think, a better defense last year to kind of hold off opposing teams' comeback rallies. But now this year, with the loss of Patrick Queen, with the loss of Geno Stone, Jadeveon Clowney's not there anymore, it kind of leaves you vulnerable to these comebacks where you might not have such a dominant defense to hold off this momentum switching drive that the Raiders have. So now that you have Derrick Henry, you're thinking, we have the guy, we have the closer to kind of just demoralize teams, be unstoppable in the run game. And as much as they want to pack the box in, it doesn't matter because we have a great running game. And I guess that goes back to the problem with this offensive line, right? Because they did lose 3 starters. So to make that change and have a new running back come in, I guess you could also point to the fact that 3 new starters on this offensive line was not going to mesh too well with having such a dominant running game. But with that being the case, and Derrick Henry just not seeing the ball too much in the final 10 minutes of this game, Las Vegas mounted a very impressive drive with a couple of big throws and catches from Gardner Minshew. Brock Bowers had an amazing game. Devontae Adams had a dynamic game as well. The Raiders ultimately tie the game up at 23-23 with 4 minutes left in this game. Even still, after this, I kind of understand why, a little bit. I can sort of understand why the Ravens would like to pass it a bit more now, sort of gain some more field position, right? Because if you go out there and run it now, now you decide to run it and you get stuffed on the first or second play of that drive, now you're in a 3rd and long and you're really giving up the momentum. So I kind of understand why they try to incorporate some passes, but even still, it didn't work out great for them because the following drive by the Ravens, they try to get a drive going, but it leads to a Max Crosby sack, which ultimately puts them in a 3rd and 15 or something like that, and they, give in. They just throw a little dump off and they punt the ball back. And from that point on, Baltimore never saw the ball back with they never got the ball back with a real solid chance to tie the game because at 23-23, when the Raiders had that game-tying touchdown, there was 4 minutes left. The Ravens go 3 and out, and now they kick the ball back to the Raiders, and they have another good drive that ultimately leaves them with 27 seconds left to kick that field goal, and they make it 26-23, and that's pretty much the game from there. The Ravens had this miracle kind of lateral play that didn't go anywhere, and then the clock hit 0 and the Ravens lose. They fall to 0-2, 26-23, and up until yesterday also, to give you some context of the Raiders and kind of their struggle, the Raiders had lost their last 49 games when they were trailing by 10 points in the 4th quarter. Baltimore failed to close out another comfortable lead in the regular season that, they always just seem to lose when they're in these moments. And I mentioned Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams had 9 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Brock Bowers, similarly, 9 receptions for 98 yards. And Baltimore lose another game, allowing 17 carries for 28 yards to the Raiders' running game, in which I thought that was going to be a big problem because I felt that the Ravens were going to run it better with Derrick Henry. That wasn't the case. It was more of the same from week 1, and they lose to a team that had less than 30 rushing yards between 4 running backs. As much as the Ravens kind of struggle with their own run game and deciding what to do, there was no running back ultimately out there for the Raiders. 30 yards between 4 guys. They gave up on that aspect of their game plan, and they still won this game, which I think says a lot more about the Ravens than it does to the Raiders at this point. The Ravens allow, these teams to kind of, stay in games with passing too much, and I get it. You kind of want to establish some sort of momentum, but, Derrick Henry standing right there. Shots below the belt. That was such a bad game for the Ravens. Must win against the Cowboys. It makes it interesting, right? Just talking about the Cowboys and this Ravens team, both coming off of bad losses in different waves. The Cowboys getting blown out. The Ravens losing at home to this Raiders team, which I believe had no business being in this game with them. So the next game is going to be in Dallas. How each of these teams approaches it and how well their defenses play is going to be huge as well. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a must-win more so, I think, for the Ravens, because going to 0-3 is going to be worse than the Cowboys going to 1-2. So that's where we're at with the Ravens right now. And just capping this segment off, struggling the most at how to run plays with Derrick Henry because in one point with Derrick Henry in the game, to kind of play devil's advocate here, as opposed to my original point of running more with Derrick Henry, you could look at it as a bit of this offense being predictable, right? At one point, Derrick Henry had 4 carries for -5 yards because opposing defenses know when he's in the game, most likely you're going to run the ball, and the Raiders were all over that. So you don't want to be too obvious with it, right? I think the Ravens, that's their fear a little bit with overdoing it with Derrick Henry. But then on the other side, when they see Justice Hill out there, it's almost always going to be a pass. So you don't want to overdo it with each running back. And I think the biggest point to me is using Derrick Henry. What I mean by using Derrick Henry more is just have him out there and be an emphasis and more emphatic way to go about this offense, right? If that makes sense. You look at Derrick Henry, you don't necessarily just have to run it up the middle with him every time. You could incorporate more RPOs, play actions, option plays. Just try to manipulate the defense. Use Derrick Henry out there to your advantage rather than just simply having him back there and it's a run where we just think we're more dominant than you. We're just going to run it up the middle with Derrick Henry. It has to go deeper than that. Same thing with Justice Hill. If he's in there, you could throw it to him as much as you'd want, but also manipulate the defense a little bit, right? Hand it off to him a couple times. Have him go off for some big gains. Once they do that, they start to pack it in a little bit more. You start incorporating your tight ends as much as well. Isaiah Likely, there's no reason why he should be targeted 3 times after the game he had in Kansas City. That's another thing. You're not using the play action as much. When you allow the Raiders to sit back there and know that the pass is coming, when Derrick Henry's not in the game, then you're doing yourself a disservice, right? You're not using the weapons you have at the maximum disposal. So I'd like the Ravens to kind of figure that out heading into next week, finding a way to use both of their tight ends, more play actions with Derrick Henry, maybe incorporating him in the passing game as well. That's another thing they could do. They need to get this looking a little bit better, because if they lose to the Cowboys after the Cowboys just got destroyed at home, it's going to be even worse for the Ravens, right, at 0-3. So the Ravens, another team that got upset in week 2, and then that leads us into our last segment of today's show, going into the last game I want to talk about quickly. Another team that got sort of upset was the Detroit Lions. Another home upset loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 20-16. More on that game. What impressed me about the Bucs, are they for real in the NFC? All those questions will be answered right after this break. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. You guessed it, another home upset loss by another team in week 2. This time talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers upsetting the Detroit Lions at home with a 20-16 score in a playoff rematch that we saw just yesterday. A playoff rematch of last year's divisional round. This time had a different result in this time around, because last time in January, I'm assuming the Lions came out on the winning end of this matchup. A very close game still, but this time around, the Tampa Bay Bucs surprising a lot of people with this win, especially me, because like I said before, I picked the Lions to win this game, and now the Bucs moved to 2-0. The Lions fought a 1-1 in 2 close games. Arguably, you could say maybe if the Rams were fully healthy, maybe they could win that game. And, then everything's just upside down, right, with the Lions going 0-2 if the Rams would have won that game. But, just weird results, a lot of upsets yesterday for a lot of these favoring teams. Ethan Baker, a top 10 quarterback in this league. He's so good. Yeah, I think at this point you could say that. I think he is playing like a top 10 quarterback, because a lot of the quarterbacks, I think, have also not been playing too great. You look at Trevor, not impressing too much. I'm trying to think, Lamar, for as good as the Ravens are and how talented he is, I would expect more from him. Burrow played very good yesterday, but didn't play too well in the first game. Josh Allen has been up there. Obviously, he's playing very good, but top 10, you look at Dak, hasn't been playing great at all. I think Baker's made a good case for himself, especially after this game, because, the score was very close throughout the entire game. The Bucs scored the only touchdown in the first half to take that lead, 13-6 at the half, and into the second half, obviously. The Lions didn't score a touchdown until the third quarter, towards the end of that third quarter, with David Montgomery getting into the end zone, and that took the lead from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ultimately, that made it 16-13 in favor of the Detroit Lions, after they got a field goal before that, I should have mentioned before. But they had the lead 16-13 heading into the fourth quarter, or actually no, my mistake. They didn't take it into the fourth quarter because with about 40 or 30 seconds left in that third quarter, Baker responded from that touchdown drive from the Lions with an 11-yard rushing touchdown to end the third quarter now officially, 20-16 after three quarters, and then no points were scored in the fourth quarter. Detroit failing to convert on a couple of fourth down plays, and the Bucs defense really holding strong in this one. They win it 20-16 overall, and then other than the connection to Chris Godwin, which he finished the day with 7 receptions for 117 yards and a touchdown as well, the Bucs really weren't moving the ball all too great. It wasn't until that moment from Baker Mayfield where they kind of string together a drive in the third quarter and he capped it off with that 11-yard rush. The Bucs weren't dominating the Lions to the extent that the Lions were dominating, because you look at their stat line and Jared Goff had over 300 passing yards. He did have 2 interceptions, which doesn't help, but he had over 300 passing yards. Jahmyr Gibbs had 84 rushing yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 11 receptions for 119 yards. So if you look at all those numbers, you're thinking that the Lions could have won this game by maybe a touchdown or two, but there was a lot of 20 or something field goals, right? 20-something yard field goal attempts, 30-something yard field goal attempts, because the Lions had no problem getting into the red zone, but at the end of the day, they finished 1 for 7 in the conversion rate for touchdowns in the red zone, right? They only converted on one of them, and a lot of them were just 3 points, and the Bucs stayed in this game until a critical moment, right? Like we just talked about with the Raiders, like we just talked about with the Bengals. They stayed into this game until that critical moment, and they won all those critical moments, right? Baker running it into the end zone, and their defense just continuing their dominance throughout the entire game in the red zone. Going back even to the Eagles at the start of this show, right? Back until their game with the Packers. Dominant defense in the red zone, only giving up 3 points to stay in the game, control the fire, right? Just bend, don't break. Ultimately, in the end, if you have a good enough team, if you have a good enough quarterback and impressive enough talent on offense, if you're able to do that and the other team is quite frankly just giving the game away, selling it basically, you're going to have an opportunity. And all three of these teams, the Bucs, the Raiders, the Chiefs, ultimately also took advantage of that. And from that point on, you look more into this Bucs offense, which is talented, like I said, but they really didn't have a great game. The running game was okay from Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. Only Mike Evans, he was the only wide receiver to have more than 1 reception outside of Chris Godwin. And their defense just played exceptionally well for the Bucs. And the Lions, I'm sure they're going to want to have this game back. I'm sure from how dominant their offensive line is, from how talented they are overall, they're going to be having trouble sleeping just based off of this loss, because in these ugly, tight, just muddy games, you'd expect the Lions to kind of win these games just because of their identity and the running, the relentlessness of the running game. You'd think that these games suit them, so they kind of got beat at their own game here with the Bucs beating them at home as well. But this kind of brings up the question now: how impressed are we with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now, and are they for real? I know the question came up of the Saints being for real before, but you could say the same thing about the Bucs. Are they for real now after beating the Commanders comfortably at home, with a better offensive performance. And now this time showing their, variety of this football team on the other side of the ball with their defense, stepping in now as the dominant side of the ball. Their offense, not really all there, not as efficient as they were in week 1, but their defense just, coming in to save the day, holding down the Lions offense. And are the Bucs for real now? To give my answer, I would say I want to see them more in another game, right? Because the Commanders are one thing. This game against the Lions is impressive. I will give them that. Like I said before with the Saints, the win and the way that they beat the Cowboys in Dallas was impressive. Now, next week, when the Saints take on the Eagles in Philadelphia, that's going to be the epitome of a great litmus test for them to potentially go to 3-0 if they beat the Philadelphia Eagles. And similarly for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They play the Broncos next week. I expect them to win that one. They should be 3-0. But then afterwards, ironically, they also play the Eagles, this time in Tampa Bay, in that rematch of that wild card round that we had last year's playoffs, where the Eagles, I'm sure they're going to be wanting their revenge to kind of avenge that loss that they had in the playoffs. So it's funny how they will play the Eagles and see how well they match up against them. So not yet. I think I'm still holding off on the Bucs to really say that they're for real, because for real to me is having a chance to win the conference championship, and I don't know quite yet if I'm ready to put them up there with the Eagles or the 49ers or even the Lions still to this point. I think the Lions, I'm not really worried about them. They just had a rough game. They're not going to go 1 for 7 a lot, if ever, again in this regular season from a touchdown to field goal conversion rate. So I'm not too worried about them. They just had a rough game. I'm more impressed with the fact that the Bucs came in here because of what I saw in week 1 and how dominant their offense was, to kind of see their defense take over. I was very happy with that. And to do it in a hostile environment as well, to block out all the noise and just shut the opposing offense down, I think was very, very impressive. Now, this division could be flipped on its head, right? If the Saints win next week, if they're 3-0, the Bucs are 3-0, and potentially the Falcons and the Panthers are 0-3, right? Because if the Falcons lose tonight and they lose next week to the Kansas City Chiefs, they could be 0-3. And that would be just completely out of left field, saying that the Saints and the Bucs are 3-0, and the Falcons, who everybody was so high on this year, be at a spot where they're 0-3. So still a lot to be played out before that scenario is a reality, but it's kind of trending towards that, right? I'm liking what I see out of the Saints. The Bucs, after another big win, also, putting their hat in there as being a serious threat this year, but not for real. I'm getting there, but I need to see it a bit more out of the Bucs. I still have some questions about the running game and how much pressure they're able to generate to opposing quarterbacks, but they're 2-0. 2-0 is 2-0. I don't care how you get there. If you're there, there's a good reason for that, and hopefully they continue to keep this momentum going heading into next week. And now, that'll do it. That'll wrap it up for today's show. That's the last game I wanted to go over, because there was all those games I wanted to bring up because they were surprising in each of their own ways. But that'll do it for tonight's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. Go check out the Monday Night Football game that is going to kick off in just less than an hour now. But before you do that, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Also, follow the network on all forms of social media, and check out more of the GSMC Chip Shot Football podcast on both YouTube channels for a bunch more variety in the type of content that you have around the NFL and this show, covering all the stories and headlines around this great league. And if you like more of these live shows, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to catch more storylines and NFL topics with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me on today's show, and I hope to see you guys back here with me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great.